you can see the Loretto roots and branches is the topic that I'm dealing with today. And over the past 12 months, I've read from a variety of historical sources in regard to the history of race and enslavement in 19th and 20th century American history, particularly focusing on the experience of Catholic communities in Maryland and Kentucky. In June of 2022, I participated in the Conference on the History of Women Religious at Notre Dame, and there I heard several presentations from communities who are also engaged in research into their history regarding enslavement. In July, I made a presentation to Loretto on my research, which was also a contact point via YouTube that resulted in the first response from a woman who is a Clements descendant. Working from the list of names on the slave memorial at Loretto Mother House, I've traced several family lines in search of living descendants. To date, I have identified and contacted more than a dozen individuals via Ancestry.com, and I have received responses from 5 who are related to the Clements line. In October, I provided copy for the Loretto Facebook for a week highlighting other families that I had researched. These posts were picked up and shared by many people and organizations, further spreading information, which I will be sharing with you today. And for whatever reason, there we go. October 17th, the post featured the Clements family, of whom I spoke with you last July. Since then, I have traced numerous descendants of this family. One 7th-generation granddaughter of Nancy Clements serves on a nonprofit board in Indiana. On her online board profile, she gives thanks for her heroes, her mother, her grandmother, a great-grandmother, and a great-aunt, who surrounded her and her siblings with love, faith, discipline, a sense of responsibility and expectation, and a love of education. She says, "It's a memory I will carry with me the whole of my life, and it said to me that I had worth." That's the kind of hope that propels people. That's the hope I want to give. On October 18th, the story of young Elias Thompson tells some remembered details of daily life at Loretto in the 1850s. In the Black History files at Loretto Archives, there is a 3-page typed manuscript signed by Sister Antonella Hardy, our first archivist. There is no date, but it probably was written between 1900 and 1910. It seems possible that Leo Clements Nerinx, who, like Elias Thompson, was born in a slave cabin at Loretto, may have been the source for the details in this narrative, which is composed and edited by Antonella. This story was recorded based on memories of people who were present at the time, with phrases which were commonly used long ago, which would not be used today. The story tells how Aunt Gracie becomes a second mother for the orphan Elias, and Sister Martina Drury teaches him and other young Black children their catechism. At the age of 8, he is entrusted to collect the Loretto mail from the railroad station. Sadly, he dies in a wagon accident, and the mourners, Black and white, process to the cemetery, where Sister Antonella concludes, "With what delight he goes to greet and welcome each sister of Loretto who enters heaven's gates." Elias Thompson died young, but his story is remembered. In the post for October 19th, the only known historical photo of an African American working at Loretto Mother House shows Mary Isabel Miles Sissel at work in the kitchen. Her sash reads, "I am Aunt Belle of Loretto," indicating that this is a special occasion related to the 1912 Loretto Centennial events attended by many visitors. She is looking off to the side as if to keep her attention focused on her work as the sunlight brightens the background. Belle Miles was born enslaved in Marion County, Kentucky, sometime between 1843 and 1850. By 1870, her parents, Ben and Elizabeth Hayden Miles, owned a farm less than a mile from Loretto Mother House. Belle married Stephen Sissel in 1881, and they raised 6 children on their farm next door to her cousin, Leo Clements. Widowed in 1900, Belle worked at Loretto Mother House, where Leo was a long-time overseer. Belle lived on the Sissel family farm with son Stephen Jr. until her death in 1931. Two of her six children had descendants, Mary Betty Green and Mary Bell Spalding, both parishioners at St. Augustine Church in Louisville. I have found a few living descendants who have accounts on Ancestry.com. One individual saw the photo and contacted our archive staff to learn more. The post for October 20th contains a letter written by the formerly enslaved man Jerome Boone to Sister Jenna Rose Mattingly in 1899. Reverend William Howlett includes this letter in his book, The Life of Reverend Charles Nearings, 1915, which situates Mr. Boone with early Kentucky Catholic history in his own words. The letter. New Haven, Kentucky, June 7th, 1899. Dear Sister, I learned from the sisters at this place that you are still among the living, and that this day your Diamond Jubilee is being celebrated. Sister, I remember when you taught school at Gethsemane. You were then young. I also remember when you were superioress at Loretto. I also remember your sister, Sister Columbus. Many years with their various changes have passed since then, for I learned that you are 96 and I am 92. I must remind you that my parents and their children belonged to Father Baden, who went north as a missionary among the Indians and left us to Father Rowan and Miss Betsy Wells. Father Baden baptized me. Father Rowan and Miss Betsy were godfather and godmother. Bishop Flaget placed Father Chabrat over the female academy, Mother Isabella Clark being the superioress. We were then turned over to the female institution. Out of 12 children, I am the only one left. My last brother, Patrick, died last October. We know now, dear sister, that our time is very short, and I am notified by my Creator, I come like a thief in the night. Be ye ready. Please remember me in your prayers, and I will do likewise. Your old servant, Jerome Boone. This post was shared in late October on the memorial page for Jerome Boone on Find a Grave. Stacy Boone, the mother of the family, was alive at the age of 98 in 1880, living with son Patrick in New Haven, Kentucky. There are no other records. Her son Jerome's 1899 letter states that she and her husband and 12 children belonged to Stephen Baden at the time he left Kentucky in 1819. Baden's decision to entrust his enslaved persons to their baptismal sponsors rather than to Bishop Flaget was because he thought Flaget had treated enslaved workers unfairly during the construction of St. Joseph's Cathedral in Bardstown. Patrick Boone's daughter, Mary Boone Claggett, who probably penned the letter from her uncle Jerome, graduated from Kentucky State Normal School and taught in the public schools for 43 years. In 1916, she is listed with her daughter, Willa, teaching in the colored school in New Haven. Mary Claggett was her uncle's sole heir in his will, and she was obviously well respected in the community, as noted in her 1936 obituary. I have found several of her living descendants on Ancestry.com. The October 21st post focused on a building very familiar to Loretto. But do we know everyone who lived here? Austin Smith and his family lived in Father Nearing's old cabin at the site of Little Loretto from the 1870s to the 1920s. Born enslaved in 1853, young Austin was sent by Father Lavial of St. Mary's College to live with an elderly couple, the Bowmans, then residing in the old cabin. After the Civil War, Mr. Smith worked in Louisville and returned to buy the old double dog trot cabin in 1875, and he and his wife Kate raised 6 children there. In 1895, Mother Catherine Connor desired to relocate half the cabin to Loretto Mother House, where it stands today. She contracted with Austin Smith to purchase the logs for $100, which was a lot of money in those days. And according to the owner's desires, the foundations were not removed, and the other half of the cabin, where the Smiths were living, was left on the property. Loretto's workmen took the building apart, hauled the logs to Loretto, and rebuilt the cabin on the east lawn of the Academy building. Mother Francisca Lamy, in her diary of November 19th, 1899, adds, Father Nerink's house is moved to the cemetery. Mr. John Elder, superintendent, and his workmen effected the transportation at a snail pace with round bars as rollers. In 1912, at the time of Loretto's centennial, 60 Sisters of Loretto visited Austin Smith, still living at Old Loretto. He welcomed them with a speech in which he said, these are his words, when I had to abolish my old house, which I gladly did to accommodate the Mother Superior who wished to purchase Father Nerink's logs, my family wanted me to move nearer the road for convenience. But in the presence of my wife and family, I said, no, I want it put back just as it was where I found it when I was a 7-year-old boy 50 years ago. Austin Smith died in his little Loretto cabin on December 30th, 1925, and is buried at St. Charles Cemetery. The Smith family has numerous descendants, none of whom seemingly have an ancestry account tree. However, there are several fairly recent obituaries on Find a Grave which list descendants living in Marion County and Louisville, as well as in Indiana, Tennessee, and Georgia. All these stories have been shared by a wide audience. Statistics from Loretto Facebook posts are curated by Natalie Guevara, who shared with me the numbers from the week of October 17th to 21st. Reach means the estimated number of people who have seen a post, not including shares, and they total over 14,000 for the week. Engagement means people who clicked or liked or commented or shared a post, totaling nearly 2,000. Nearly 500 people either liked or reacted to the week's postings, and there were 46 written comments and 42 shares of stories to other Facebook sites, including both individuals and organizations. So these numbers are really going places and probably are continuing. Moving forward, I'm researching Loretto from Missouri down the Mississippi, no, not literally going down the river, but to Louisiana and Arkansas, where Loretto schools were established for brief periods in the 1820s and 1840s. Sisters Joan Campbell and Liliana Owens have written in detail about these foundations. I've also found historic newspaper advertisements for Loretto Academy at the Mother House and Bethlehem Academy in Elizabethtown as early as 1836 in papers in Mississippi, indicating that the finishing school style of education was attracting plantation families from the Deep South in the antebellum period. In the Reconstruction era, Loretto founded St. Mary's Academy in Montgomery, Alabama, where news articles from the 1870s describe a Catholic ladies' fair held in support of Loretto, which also included a salute to the Montgomery Grays, which was a military organization of former Confederate soldiers. All of these cultural intersections show the complicated times in which our history was lived, what was written and what was left out. Every system, cultural, religious, educational, family, every system has its own internal diversity. As it has often been said, when you have met one Loretto, you have met one Loretto. So I feel great respect for each individual whose unique life story I have been researching and sharing with you. Now, I am in the early stages of planning that road trip to Arkansas and Louisiana in the spring, visiting the Loretto Heritage Sites here in Arkansas along the Arkansas River, and here in Louisiana, the inset showing Bayou La Fourche, Assumption Parish, the red star indicating the location of where our sisters were for a brief time in the 1820s, speaking no French, being totally out of their comfort zone, and very, very hard pressed to communicate. Um, and what I hope to do in this trip is to visit the places Loretto had been, as well as historical societies, plantations, and museums to learn how they, there on site, are reinterpreting and expanding on local history. In dialogue with others, I hope to get a better idea of how we can respond to what we are learning. For some questions that continue to guide my search and guide our conversations. How might we reframe our historical displays and places where visitors come to learn about Loretto? How can we engage in meaningful public ways with the descendants of families whose names are on the slave memorial? And how can we collaborate with other religious communities and archdiocesan archives in presenting a true history of Catholic life and missions in Kentucky and other areas? To be continued.